Hey, everyone. Great Tuesday evening to everybody. How are you all doing today? It's your girl, Shay Marie. Haven't done a live in a while. But as you guys can read in my description of this video, I basically, as you can see, I'm on a campaign I'm an advocate of reading and us getting a comprehension and learning more. And I was inspired by my brother Bruce Noble L, who's just a ball of inspiration and motivation to really go after our real freedom and the true remedy from servitude, perpetual servitude, and slavery. So welcome everyone. Welcome to everyone that's watching. I'm going to be reading today a book called Meet Your Straw Man and Whatever You Want to Know. So get your... Thanks for the love. Welcome, honey. Thank you for coming. So I know you guys have seen me posting before about meeting your straw man. A lot of you may already know this information, but a lot of you don't know this information. So I'm trying to promote more reading and getting an understanding of what we read, more of a comprehension, to increase our comprehension level, our reading levels, and to help us all grow together. So this video is for that purpose. I'm actually going to share this. Let me see if I can share this video. I need to invite. All right, I don't know. Yeah, it's not gonna let me. Okay. I'll just share it afterwards. So I'm going to read this book. I'm going to go as long as I possibly can tonight. I don't know if I'll get through the whole thing, but it is a real thin book, you guys. Very small. So you should be able to get through this within a couple of hours. So it says, meet your straw man and whatever you want to know. Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. Proverbs 3:13. We the people. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So to me that basically means we give them their power, we consent to be governed. You guys, so everything that is being done to us is by our consent, or whether it's the lack thereof, whether we know that we are consenting or not, but by us not standing up and saying anything, we are consenting. So it says, let's have a little quiz. Who meets there? This is the Capitol building. Who meets there? What do they do there? Do they help you in any way? If your answers were 1. Members of the government. 2. They represent all the people living in the country. 3. Yes, they create laws to protect me and my family. Then let me congratulate you on getting every one of your answers absolutely wrong, you guys. You're absolutely wrong if you answered those questions the way that they said, if those were your answers. It says, didn't do too well on that quiz. Okay, let's have another go. When was slavery abolished? 5. Was slavery legal? 6. Are you in debt to a financial institution? So it says, here are the answers. The serving officers of a commercial corporation. 2 is they think of ways to take money and goods from you. And 3 is no, absolutely not. They help themselves and not you, which is actually the truth. So slavery has never been abolished, and you yourself are considered to be a slave right now. Yes, slavery is legal, although it is not lawful. You need to discover the difference. So know that basically this is letting you know that there is a difference between legal and lawful. So like a lot of people don't understand that our fiat money, the dollars that we carry, that is legal tender. It is not lawful money. The only lawful money is gold and silver. So those are the differences, guys. It says, no, you are not in debt to any financial institution. Does this seem a little strange to you? If it does, then read on. Those in power have a big secret. Paying tax is optional. Registering a vehicle is optional. Paying a fine is optional. Let me zoom in on that, because I need y'all to understand this. Because a lot of you don't know this, and a lot of us are just living our lives acquiescing to things that we are not required to do, and we are choosing to do things that are optional, and we don't have to, and we're living our lives in a perpetual slavery by doing this. So registering a vehicle is optional. Paying a fine is optional. Attending a court is optional. Paying tax is optional, you guys, okay? It says you can if you want to, but you don't have to. Surprise? Well, try this on for size. Every mortgage and loan is fully repaid from day one. You can pay it again if you want to, but you don't have to. So basically what this is saying is that when you sign your mortgage, it is actually paid, you guys, from day one. But you actually, the next month or two, start paying a monthly payment, and you don't have to. It says, if nobody has told that you have a straw man, then this could be a very interesting experience for you. Your straw man was created when you were very young, far too young to know about it. But then it was meant to be a secret, as its purpose is to swindle you, and it has been used very effectively to do just that ever since it was created. The book says, perhaps it's about time that you learn about your straw man and how you can stop it being used against you. Knowing about it is the most important first step. You need to go on a journey of discovery, and I'm afraid that what you are about to discover is not very pleasant. However, if you decide to act on what you learn, it could change your life for the better. If you think that you are in debt, then you can get out of it if you are willing to stand up for your rights and refuse to be swindled any longer. Interesting. If so, then let's start at the beginning and find out where your straw man came from and why you should care about it. It all started when your parents had a happy event and you entered the world. You don't know exactly when that was because you were not aware of the days of the week, the months or the years, or even what year it was. Even after some months had gone by, you still were not aware of these things. But by that time, your straw man had already been created, and it was being used to make some very unscrupulous people rich. None of this was your fault. It happened because your parents were fooled into thinking that they needed to register your birth and get a birth certificate for you. So they applied for a birth certificate, not understanding what would happen when they did. Well, then, what happened? Well, then, what did happen? According to the local authority, they lost ownership of their baby, which is you, and they allowed a straw man to be created. This is not something which they can be blamed for, as nobody told them it would or could happen, nor did anybody tell your parents what a straw man is or how it can be used against their baby. In actual fact, the registration is a contract which is, in reality, null and void because there was no full disclosure by the local authority, nor was there intent to contract on the part of your parents. The registering of a baby's birth passes ownership of the baby to the local authority, and that alone allows the local authority to take the child away from the parents if they ever wanted to. This applies until the child reaches the age of maturity set by the current legal statutes. Doing that is not lawful, but after the birth has been registered, it is legal, and there is a world of difference between those two terms, a difference which it is very important that you come to clearly understand. So what is a straw man? A straw man is a fictitious legal entity created with the hope that as the child grows up, he will be fooled into believing that he is actually the straw man, which he most definitely is not, and pay all sorts of imaginary costs and liabilities which get attached to the straw man by con artists. How is a straw man created? Well, the mechanism involves that unnecessary birth certificate which the parents imagine is about and belongs to their baby, neither of which is actually true. If the baby has been named James and the family name is Martin, then you would expect the birth certificate to have the name James Martin printed on it. If that is what is printed on it, then all is well, and it is a genuine birth certificate and nothing more. However, if another name is there, then the document is not a birth certificate, but instead is alternative entries. But is instead the creation of a straw man masquerading as James Martin. The alternative entries might be any of the following examples: James Martin in all caps, Mr. James Martin, Martin with a comma, Mr. James, or anything else which is not exactly James Martin and nothing less. Why create a straw man? The answer is in order to charge the straw man imaginary costs and penalties and fool the human James Martin into paying those amounts. These imaginary charges include income tax, council tax, inheritance tax, capital gains tax, road tax, import tax, value added tax, fuel levy, loan interest, bank charges, and anything else that full-time professionals can think up are confident that you never agreed to pay and don't need to pay. Legalese. Legalese is a secret language invented to trick you. It causes English words, but attaches secret meaning to those words with the sole intention of stopping you from believing that what they are saying to you has nothing to do with the normal meaning in the English language. Their purpose is to cheat you and rob you. For example, they will ask to you, do you understand? In English, that means, do you comprehend what I'm saying to you? And the automatic response would be yes, meaning I do comprehend what you are saying to me. But these sneaky, underhand people have changed the meaning in legalese to mean, do you stand under me? Meaning, do you grant me authority over you so that you have to obey whatever I tell you to do? Wow. What makes it even worse is the fact that they will never tell you that they have switched from English to legalese. And if that is not dishonest, underhand, or unscrupulous, then I don't know what is. If you answer the question believing that English is being spoken, then they pretend that you are contracting with them to become subordinate to them. Whether or not that is actually true is debatable, because that is effectively a verbal contract between you and them. And for any contract to be valid, I'm sorry. I think the video stopped for some reason. I'm not sure why. However, where was I at? Whether or not that is okay, it says, if you answer the question believing that English is being spoken, then they pretend that you are contracting with them to become subordinate to them. Whether or not that is actually true is debatable, because that is effectively a verbal contract between you and them. And for any contract to be valid, there has to be full and open disclosure of all the terms of the contract, and then unreserved acceptance by both parties. And in these cases, that has most definitely not occurred. But what is the point in all of this? Well, this maneuver is intended to trick you into agreeing to represent your straw man. Why? Now that's a good question. But to answer, it takes a bit of explaining, and you need to understand the overall situation. All humans are born equal with complete freedom of choice and action. If you live in the same place as a lot of other people, then there are a few restrictions which have grown up by common consent over time. These restrictions are for the protection of the other people living near you. These restrictions are called the law, or more accurately, common law, and they are few in number and very easy to understand. They are: you must not injure or kill anyone. You must not steal or damage things owned by someone else. You must be honest in your dealings and not swindle anyone. These restrictions have resulted from hundreds of years of disputes which have been dealt with through using common sense and opinions of ordinary people. They are the only limitations on you, and if you do not want to abide by them, then you need to go to some isolated place and stay away from other people. Many people think that there are hundreds of other laws which they have to keep, and new ones every day, but that is not so. Those other things are called statutes, and keeping them is optional for you, the human, but they are not optional for your fictitious straw man. And that is why the people who benefit from those things want to persuade you to represent your straw man, and so become subject to all their invented restrictions and charges. If you knew that they were optional, would you agree to give most of your earnings away in taxes and similar charges? 2, pay to own a vehicle, pay to own a television set, pay to drive on roads which were built with your money. 5, be forced to join the armed services if you are told to. 6, send an army which is supposed to represent you into another country to murder innocent people there. Were you ever told that these things are optional? If you agree to represent your straw man, then these things become binding on you. These are some of the statutes which politicians keep inventing and in order to make you poor, make them and their friends rich, and keep you in a position where you have to do everything they say, no matter how much they harm, no matter how much that harms you and does away with your natural freedom and rights. But says somebody, we elect a government to represent us, and so we have to do what they say. After all, they have our best interests at heart, don't they? Well, this is a nice thought, but is it actually true? No, it isn't. You think that you elect politicians to represent you in your government, but this is not what you actually do. This is part of a very carefully fostered illusion intended to keep you in your place and giving most of your earnings away, typically 80% of all you earn. Part of the secret is that what is supposed to be your government is actually a privately owned for-profit company, and all that you do when voting is to help choose the serving officers inside that company. It will never make the slightest difference to what happens in the future, as that company policies and actions are controlled by the owners of the company, and they are not influenced in any way whatsoever by what you want. Think this is far-fetched? Then check it out via Duns Bradstreet or any of the other places which records the setting up and performance of 160 million commercial companies worldwide. When you do that, you will discover, for example, that the United States is a commercial for-profit company. The United States Corporation is a private company. The non-federal Federal Reserve Bank is a private company set up in the year 1913 as is every court and every police force, and even Congress is a company and not a person. Just in case you are not aware of it, the purpose of any commercial for-profit company or corporation is to make money for its owners and shareholders, if there are any. The people who you think of as the government don't do anything that earns money. They instead take money from you, and their main job is to make sure that you don't realize that they are in the same position as IBM, which takes away millions of your money every year. So why all the pretense of there being a genuine government which you elect and who serves you? They don't want you to understand that they are just running a company which produces nothing of any worth, something like a betting shop where almost every customer loses money, and wake up to the fact that unlike what you have been told all your life, this is all optional, and you don't need to play their rip-off game any longer unless you want to. They want you to be so burdened down with paying them money and working so hard and so long that you don't have the time, money, or energy to stop and think about what is happening to you and your family. They are desperate to stop you from just walking away from their scam, so they make every effort to connect you with the fiction, which is your straw man, because fictitious entities like commercial companies can't have any dealing with a real man or a real woman. They can only deal with another fiction like your straw man, and it is essential that they fool you into believing that you have to act on behalf of your straw man, which you don't. They have a number of well-proven methods of distracting you and keeping you from finding out. They want you to see a great deal of entertainment, not because there is anything wrong with entertainment, but while you are being entertained, you will not be asking you will not be asking awkward questions. Also, they are very careful that entertainment reinforces their make-believe world and makes it appear to be the real world where everyone is under the government. Police officers uphold the law. Taxes are essential in order to keep things going, and things which are said to be bad for you are taxed heavily, not to make money, but supposedly to encourage you to avoid those things. You will notice that they keep saying that their invented statutes are the law, which they most certainly are not. But if they say it often enough, people start believing it and never think to question what they say. They also have another very effective technique, and that is fear. Yes, it is bad. Fear is the worst thing ever, you guys. They want you to be afraid of imaginary terrorists, afraid of disasters, afraid of new diseases, afraid of foreign countries, afraid of the economy doing badly and inflation rising. If you doubt this, then take a look at the news and count the number of positive, uplifting news items and the number of negative or depressing news items. It doesn't take much in the way of research to see the very heavy negative bias in the news. The reason behind this is to make you feel that you need government and an army to protect you from these supposed dangers. It is easy to keep the news items biased that way because all of the major news agencies and media outlets in the world are owned by only 5 or 6 privately owned commercial companies. So to supposedly connect you to the straw man, which they created for you when your birth was registered, then they use the legalese technique of conning you with the name of the straw man. If you are ill-advised enough to go to court, which is a corporate place of business, as the accused, you will be asked to confirm your name, quoting the full name shown on your birth certificate, which is the legal personality. Titles such as Mr., Dr., Rev, Gov, Sec, or whatever are not asked for, as they are not required. The accused is actually the legal personality, which is the name of the birth certificate. So when they ask for the person's name, they are talking to the legal personality, which is the straw man, and not to the human. This is because a human cannot exist in the legal world. Only pieces of paper can, and it is something which they are very careful not to tell you. This is really key issue. Natural law and common law are the only laws which apply to humans, and they deal only with harming other people or causing them loss. Outside of those restrictions, a human has free and unlimited entitlement to do anything he chooses which complies with these principles. As opposed to this, acts of Congress, statutes, and statutory instruments, contracts, do not apply to human, but only to the piece of paper, which is the legal personality, which has no reality. As the legal fiction, the legal personality was created by the company called the United States Corporation, and that company gets to say what the rights and duties for that piece of paper are. When a person is born in America, a mother or father submits a birth certificate registration form, which is a piece of paper. There is no requirement under law or under common law to do this. When any limited company or corporation is set up, there is always a certificate of registration in order to create a legal personality, and it is a piece of paper. Please note that an American birth certificate states quite clearly that it is not evidence of identity, meaning that it is nothing to do with any human. Marked on it is U.S. copyright, showing clearly that it does not belong to an individual and was created by the state. The act of registration or registering a child makes the child a ward of the court, and the child can be taken away from the parent at any time. 1 second, guys. The legalese definition of words which sound commonplace can be found in Black's Law Dictionary, and the current edition is the 8th. Interestingly, in legalese, you, the human, are defined as a monster, which shows exactly what the people who use legalese think of you. Charming people, aren't they? Another trick that they try to play on you is to imply that a summons is something which you must obey. In fact, it is only an invitation to attend their place of business. They are not inviting you, the man or woman, but instead they are inviting the legal personality to their place of business. And please note that there is a choice, and it is only an invitation. The legal personality is just a piece of paper, a birth certificate created by the commercial company called the United States Corporation, and it is not the human. You can't be forced into a contract, so they have to deceive you into entering into one without understanding what you are doing. They are using deception, as every judge's court is a trading name of the commercial company called the Department of Justice, which does not have a parent company listed, meaning that it is a parent company itself. Legal people on being shown this company registration respond by realizing that if the information is genuine, which it is, then the U.S. has been lawless for more than 100 years because the whole justice system is being dealt with by a commercial company. Going to court in connection with any civil action is a very bad idea, as the only function of the court is to judge between two parties who disagree and then penalize the loser. The court doesn't care who wins or loses, and the objective of the court is to make a profit for its owners, as it is a commercial enterprise, and its purpose is to acquire money from anybody who is foolish enough to attend. If you look at the summons, which is really an invitation to go to court, you will see that it is not your name, but in the name of the straw man, which they are hoping to fool you into representing. Dealing with debt. Because of the very high percentage of money earned being taken away from the average person, it is not usual for people to end up with what looks like debt. Most people spend their time worrying over the statement of what they are told they owe and do endless calculations to see if they agree with the numbers which they have been sent. Again, this is the sort of misdirection which magicians use to fool audiences, distracting their attention away from where the action is really taking place. Here the question is really not how much is owed, but instead is anything actually owed. You need to remember that any financial institution is a legal fiction and does not actually exist. As a result of this, it can only deal with other legal fictions, essentially other pieces of paper, and it can't have any dealings with a man or a woman, as they are not legal fiction. It is also important to understand what passes for money nowadays. Let's say a trusty friend, James Martin, goes looking for a loan, and he fills out an application form with the Swindle Bank Incorporation for $10,000. Interestingly, the form which he is asked to sign, says that he has already received the $10,000, although the loan has not been approved. Wow. The next day, the loan is approved, and James is handed a check, which he is asked to sign and deposit to his account with the bank. We won't follow up on that. Wait a minute. With the bank. We won't follow up on that very interesting procedure at this time, but please remember that he now has provided 2 signatures. I'm sorry, guys. For $10,000 in strawman name, and he has received is a 1 and 4 zeros in the account of the Swindle bank account. All goes well for several months until James loses his job and does not manage to get another one. This is financial trouble which he does not know how to deal with. Time goes by, and James has not had significant money to make payments against his loan from the Swindle Bank Incorporation. He starts getting letters from the bank saying that he must pay the arrears immediately and keep up with the payments in the future. There is not the slightest chance of that happening, as James does not have any money and he does not know what to do. Fortunately, Peter, the next door neighbor of James, happens to be an independent financial advisor with years of experience, and James has the idea of asking him for help. Peter is willing to help, and so he sits down and goes through the paperwork. Then he tells James, "You must not ignore this situation. Write back immediately and say that you agree to pay any financial obligation which you may lawfully owe, on the condition that they provide validation of the debt, that is the actual accounting verification." Number 1, validation of the debt, that is the actual accounting. And 2, the verification of their claim against you, that is a signed invoice. 3, a copy of the contract binding both parties, you and them, in a letter by certified mail, so that there is an independent witness to it having been delivered. Every letter you write should be marked clearly without prejudice, which means that you reserve all your lawful rights and you accept no contract unless it is shown to be lawful by meeting the 4 essential conditions to a lawful binding contract, namely: 1 is full disclosure. You were not told that you were actually creating the credit with your wet ink signature. 2, equal consideration. They brought nothing of value to the table and so had nothing to lose. 3, lawful terms and conditions. Yours were based on fraud. 4, the wet ink signature of both parties. Corporations can't sign because they have no right or mind to contract, since they are soulless legal fictions, and furthermore, no third party can sign a contract on their behalf. Peter then tells James that agreeing to pay, provided that the evidence of a lawful debt can be produced, stops him being taken to court, because courts only adjudicate between parties who are in dispute, and as James has agreed to pay, there is no dispute, so the court would not accept any applications for a hearing. If the swindle bank were foolish enough to try, James has only to send the court a copy of his letter agreeing to pay, and the case would be thrown out, dismissed immediately, and the bank might well be penalized for wasting the court's time. The bank is now in trouble as it has been running a con game on James, and so can't produce the documents for which James has asked. The request by James was reasonable in every respect. However, a loan agreement is a contract, and so there has to be full. One second. Can you give me some water? There has to be full disclosure of all the details, which there isn't, or which there wasn't. Both sides have to put up something of equal worth, which didn't happen, and the contract has to be signed in wet ink by both parties, which the bank can't do, so the bank has a real problem. The bank will probably send a statement of what it wants James to believe is an outstanding amount. James should return this with a polite note saying that a statement is not an invoice, so would they please provide a signed invoice as requested. They will also probably send a photocopy of his loan application form, at which point James should write back and point out politely that it does not constitute a contract, as it is only signed by one of the parties, him. And he asked for a copy of the contract signed by both parties. The bank is likely to go silent at this point and stop corresponding with James. James should then write again requesting that the necessary documents be sent to him within the next 14 or perhaps 28 days. And if it does not happen, then he will consider the debt to be fully discharged. The bank will either remain silent or write back to say that the debt is fully discharged. If the bank tries phoning, then just tell them politely that you only wish to deal with this matter in writing and hang up. If the bank remains silent for the stated period of time, then James should write back stating that due to the bank's failure to provide the necessary evidence of a lawful debt within the reasonable period of time provided, that James now considers that the debt is fully discharged, and ask the bank to confirm that in writing. The bank will normally write back confirming that the debt is fully discharged and that there is nothing owing, and if it does not do that, it will stop asking for any further payments. The reason for how and why this takes place takes a good deal of explaining, and many people find it difficult to understand, so it is covered in detail on the following pages here. Many people think that this process sounds like you ripping off the bank, but this is definitely not the case. What is money? Originally in England, the unit of money was called £1 sterling. That was because it was literally sterling silver weighing 1 pound, and it was quite difficult to carry several pounds weight of currency around with you. It was arranged that the actual silver could be held in a bank, and a promissory note, which was essentially a receipt for the deposit of each pound of silver on deposit, was issued. It was much easier to carry these banknotes around and to do business with them. If you wanted to, you could always take these notes to a bank and ask for them to be cashed, and the bank would hand you the equivalent weight of sterling silver in exchange for the notes. Today, the currency in America is banknotes, which are certainly easier to carry around than metal coins. But there is one very important difference. These notes are issued by the private company called the Federal Reserve Bank, which is a good name for a company as any other name. However, if you were to take one of their banknotes to the branch of the company and ask for it to be cashed, all that they would do is give you another note for it to be cashed. All they would do is give you another note with the same numbers of credit printed on it, or alternatively, other notes with smaller numbers printed on it. This is because, unlike the original banknotes, there is nothing of any physical value backing up the banknotes of today. They are only materially worth the physical paper on which they are printed. One moment, you guys. I need to drink some water. Okay. It says it actually gets worse than that. What happens most commonly nowadays is that they do not even bother printing those pieces of paper. Now they just tap some numbers into a computer record, or if they are old-fashioned enough, they write the numbers into a ledger by hand. What do these numbers represent? Nothing at all. They have no actual value. In other words, just as much value as if you type them into your own computer. Quite meaningless, and yet a bank or other financial institution will merely lend you those numbers in return for years of your work plus interest charges. Now, isn't that really generous of them? Actually, this is not all that funny, because if you don't keep paying them money earned by your very real work, they will attempt to take your house and possessions away from you. This won't happen if you understand that what they lent you with was actually valueless. Take the case of Jerome Daly of Minnesota in America. In court, Jerome challenged the right of the bank to foreclose on his home, which had been purchased from a loan from the bank. Jerome argued that any mortgage contract required that both parties, that is himself and the bank, put a legitimate form of property for the exchange. In legal language, that is called legitimate consideration, put forward by both parties to the contract. Jerome explained that the money was, in fact, not the property of the bank, and as it had been created out of nothing as soon as the loan agreement was signed. That is, the money does not come out of the bank's existing assets, as the bank is simply inventing it. In the reality, the bank is putting up nothing of its own except for a fictional liability on paper. As the court case progressed, the president of the bank, Mr. Morgan, took a stand and admitted that the bank, in combination with the privately owned commercial company called the Federal Reserve Bank, created the entire amount of the loan in credit in its own books by means of a bookkeeping entry. The money and credit coming into existence when they created it. Further, Mr. Morgan admitted that no United States law or statute exists which gives him the right to do this. A lawful consideration must exist and must be entered to support the loan agreement. The jury found that there had to be no lawful consideration put forth by the bank, so the court rejected the bank's application for foreclosure, and Jerome Daly kept his home debt-free. That is actually a situation with all American mortgages. When someone makes an application for a mortgage or any other loan, the applicant's signature is required on the application form before the loan is approved. The signature on that signed application makes it a valuable piece of paper which the bank can deposit in its account a credit to the bank for the amount of the loan. The bank could just keep that application form and stay ahead by $100,000 or whatever, but they want more, much more. They want the borrower to pay them the same amount again, funding it by years of labor, and not only the amount of the supposed loan, but significant extra amount in interest as well. Why do you think they are so keen to lend you money? They are even willing to lend people with very poor credit, and there is no way that the bank can lose out on the deal, no matter what happens. This is why if a company starts demanding payment of large sums of money, you start by asking them to provide the accounting for the deal. In other words, you are asking them to show in writing that they provided something of genuine worth as their side of the loan contract, as they invented the money as numbers in their books with no real worth attached to those numbers. They are in deep trouble as they can't comply with your demand to see their accounting for the deal. Did you ever wonder how the average bank manages to make hundreds of millions of dollars profit every year? Well, you are looking right at where a large chunk of it comes from, the bookkeeping. This next part of the information may be a little difficult to understand. When any business is being run, the accounts are recorded as money coming in and money going out. For a bank, the money coming in is called a credit, and money going out is called a debit. The objective is to have these common amounts always match each other balance or for any customer. Not everything done in banking is immediately obvious to the average person, so it may be a little difficult to understand how everything works in this area. If you have an account with the bank and you deposit $200 to open the account, the bank enters that into its book as a credit. The credits on your account is $200 and the debit is $0. So the balance has a positive or credit value of $200. If you were to withdraw $300, then the bank would record as a debit of $300. Then the credit balance on your account is $200. The balance on your account would be, when the credit balance on your account is $200, the balance on your account would be $100 in debit. That is overdrawn by $100. If you were to deposit a further $100 and then close your account, the bank would not have any problem other than the fact that they would like to keep you as a customer. As far as accounting goes, your account is balanced and the bank is satisfied when the state of affairs $300 has come in and $300 has gone out. The book balance, case closed. Now, if you were to apply for a loan, mortgage or otherwise, for $100,000 from the bank, and they would give you an application form which is set out in such a way that you have to fill in the straw man's name rather than your own, separate boxes with one of them containing Mr., and they may even require you to fill the form in using block capital letters. You may think the capital letters are so that they can read your writing, or perhaps to make it easier for it to be entered into a computer, but the name in those capital letters belongs to the straw man and not you. You have actually just made an application on behalf of the straw man and not on behalf of yourself. You might wonder why they would want you to do this. After all, what could they ever get from the straw man? Well, you might be surprised. When the straw man was incorporated, they assigned a large monetary value to it, possibly $100 million, and they have been trading on the stock market on behalf of the straw man ever since. And you know how many years that has been. Yeah, because I'm 37. So very surprisingly, in their opinion, the little fellow is really very rich, and you have just authorized them to take the amount of your loan application from your straw man's account. So before the bank passes you any money, it has already gotten its money from the straw man account and entered it into its books as $100,000 credit to your account. Then they place $100 into your loan account as a debit. Interestingly, that loan account is now balanced and could easily be closed off as a completed deal. This is where the sneaky part comes in. To get the money out of your account, you have to write and sign a check for $100,000 on that account. What does the bank do with checks which you sign? It assigns them to the account as an asset of the bank, and suddenly the bank is ahead by $100,000 because the check is in the name of the straw man, who can supply the balance with almost any amount of money. But it doesn't end there. As the bank is confident that you know little about what is going on, that you will pay them anything up to $100,000 over the years against what you believe you owe them. If that happens, then they have made yet another $100,000 for the bank. To make things even better for them, they want you to pay them interest on the money which you don't actually owe them. Overall, they make a great deal of money when you borrow from them. So perhaps you can see now why banks make hundreds of millions in profit each year. If the loan were used to buy a property, then the bank probably insisted that you assign the title deed to them as collateral for the loan. As soon as the property deal was completed, if you then fail to keep paying them, they are likely to attempt to foreclose on the loan and sell your property quickly for an even greater profit. And to add insult to injury, if the property sale did not exceed the amount of the loan plus the charges for selling it, then they are likely to claim that you owe them the difference. Who these motherfuckers? Perhaps you now see why Jerome Daly told them to go take a running jump at themselves, and why your request for the accounting for any loan made to you puts the bank It says, and why your request for the accounting for any loan made to you puts the bank in an impossible situation. If the bank then writes and tells you that the debt is fully discharged, they still have made a massive profit on the operation, and they also hope that the vast majority of their customers will not catch on to the fact that they are paying far too much for their property, or even that there is a straw man involved. Please don't feel that you are ripping off the banks if you don't pay them what they are asking you to pay. They have already recovered everything paid out before you start paying them for the second or third time. When it is a mortgage, the entire process is very much the same. The Debt-Free Sovereign website. So here's a link, you guys. It says this link gives a very clear description of this process in Canada, and the process is very much the same everywhere else. They describe a typical property sale and mortgage this way. The buyer goes to Magic Bank to respond to the bank's claim that is in the business of lending money in accordance with its corporate charter. The buyer went to the bank believing that Magic Bank had the asset money to lend. Magic Bank never tells its customers the truth that it does not have any money to lend, nor that Magic Bank is not permitted to use their depositors' money to lend its borrowers. Notwithstanding the fact that Magic Bank does not have any money to lend, Magic Bank makes the buyer or borrower sign a mortgage loan application form, which is essentially a promissory note saying that the buyer or borrower promises to pay Magic Bank for the money, what money, which is supposed to receive from Magic Bank even before any value of consideration is received by the buyer or borrower from Magic Bank. This promissory note is a valuable consideration, a receivable, and therefore an asset transferred from the buyer to the bank, which Magic Bank enters into its own asset account as a cash deposit. After making sure that the buyer has the ability to pay the required monthly payments, the buyer has credit. Magic Bank agrees to lend the buyer the money or cash to pay the seller. Magic Bank has no money to lend, but it gave the buyer a promise to lend money by way of commitment letter or loan approval or loan authorization or loan confirmation letter, etc., signed by a bank official or loan mortgage officer employed by bank or Magic Bank. Magic Bank's acceptance of the buyer's promissory notes makes the bank liable to the buyer or borrower for the full face value of the promissory note, which is the agreed purchase price of the property, less any cash deposit or down payment money paid by the buyer directly to the seller. It is important to note at this point that all real estate transactions require that the property being sold must be conveyed by the seller to the buyer, free of all liens and encumbrances, which means that all liens such as existing mortgages, judgments, etc., be paid before the property can be mortgaged by the buyer as collateral to the mortgage loan, which is yet to be received by the buyer pursuant to the promise made by Magic Bank. How can the seller pay off this mortgage and obtain clear title if he has not received any money from the buyer? And how can the buyer mortgage a property that does not yet belong to him? This dilemma is solved using Magic Bank's magic bag of tricks. Magic Bank is in concert with the bank's lawyer or notaries causes all the liens and encumbrances to magically disappear by writing a Magic Bank check backed by the buyer's promissory note and the agreement of purchase and sale deposited into the lawyer's trust account to pay the seller for the property at closing. In essence, using the buyer's promissory note as the cash to enable the agreement of purchase and sale. So the buyer's promissory note made the conveyance possible. Magic Bank caused the property to be conveyed from the seller to the buyer with title free and clear of the encumbrances and liens. The property now belongs to the buyer, which makes it possible for the buyer to mortgage his property to Magic Bank. The buyer actually paid for the property using his own promissory note. At this point, the seller has not yet received any money or cash, so Magic Bank and its magicians must perform more magic in order to satisfy the seller's requirement that he get paid, or the whole deal is null and void. The seller does not even know that the property has been magically conveyed to the buyer's name in order for the seller to receive any money. The ensuing magic trick is accomplished this way. The buyer is made to sign another promissory note. The mortgage contract is attached to the promissory note, which makes the buyer liable to pay Magic Bank for the money or the loan which the buyer has not yet or may never receive for up to 25 years or more, depending on the term of the mortgage contract. This note is linked to the collateral through the mortgage contract, as such it is valuable to Magic Bank. Magic Bank then goes to the Federal Reserve Bank or to another bank to pledge the deal that they have just gotten from the buyer for credit. The Federal Reserve Bank then gives Magic Bank the credit. Remember, it is not Magic Bank's credit, it is the buyer's credit who promised to pay Magic Bank if and when the money is received by the buyer from Magic Bank, payable for up to 25 years or more. Note, what happened above is basically a swap transaction all banks do to monetize security. In this case, the second promissory note that is linked to the mortgage contract and signed by the buyer is a mortgage-backed security. So I've been reading for an hour. What time is it? It's 10:20. What I'm going to do is end this for the night, you guys. I stopped at page 22. Well, let's see here. I'll go ahead and finish this little section and then I'll end. So it says, Magic Bank will then agree to pay the Federal Reserve Bank a certain percentage of interest over prime. Thus, the buyer's loan package goes to the Federal Reserve Bank, which credits Magic Bank with the full amount of the credit, which is the total amount of the money Magic Bank is entitled to receive after 25 years, which is the amount of the principal plus all the interest payments the buyer has promised to pay Magic Bank for 25 years or more, which is usually 3 times the amount of the money promised by Magic Bank to the buyer. By Magic Bank just enriched itself and got paid in advance without using or risking its own money. Magic Bank's magician, the lawyer who holds the check that is backed by the buyer's original promissory note, then writes a check to the seller as payment for the property. In effect, the buyer paid the seller with his own money by virtue of the fact that it was the buyer's own money, the promissory note, that made the purchase and sale possible. Magic Bank just made a cool 300% profit without using or risking any capital of its own. Neither were there any depositors' money deducted from Magic Bank's asset account in this transaction. What really happened was pure deception, and if we, the people, tried to do this, we would end up in prison, being found guilty of fraud and criminal conversion, not to mention that the property would have been seized by the court. This is only a crime if we, the people, do it to each other, as it would be an indictable crime. If we issued a check with no funds, there would not be any deal, no purchase and sale agreement, because there is no valuable consideration. In order to decriminalize the transaction, we need Magic Bank and their cohorts to make the deal happen. It is really a conspiracy of sorts, but these persons, the banks, the lawyers, the land title officers, and even the courts do not consider the transaction as fraudulent transactions, because these transactions happen all the time. Such as a contract void ab initio, or void from the beginning, which means that the contract never took place in the first place. Moreover, the good faith and fair dealing requirement through full disclosure in non-existence, which further voids the contract. Magic Bank failed to disclose to those buyers that it will not be giving the buyer any valuable consideration and taking interest back and additional benefit to unjustly enrich the corporation. Magic Bank also failed to disclose how much profit they are going to make on the deal. Magic Bank led the buyer to believe that the money going to the seller would be coming from its own asset account. They lied because they knew, or ought to have known, that their own book or ledger would show that Magic Bank does not have any money any money to lend, and that their records will show that no such loan transaction ever took place. Their own book will show that there would be no debits from Magic Bank's asset account at all, and all that would show up are the two entries made with the buyer gave Magic Bank the first collateral or the promissory note, which enabled Magic Bank to cut a check, which made it possible to convey the property from the seller to the buyer free and clear of all liens and encumbrances, as required by the agreement of purchase and sale entered into its writing between the buyer and the seller. What really happened was not magic. In reality, the buyer's promissory note was used by Magic Bank and its musicians, the lawyers and the land title clerks, to convey free title to the buyer from the seller. So why do we need the mortgage contract at all? The other entry that will show up when we audit Magic Bank's accounts is the other pledge of collateral, including the buyer's promissory note, which was converted unlawfully and without disclosure or permission from the buyer, into a mortgage-backed security, which was swapped or deposited by Magic Bank to the Federal Reserve Bank, for which another deposit was entered into Magic Bank's transaction account. From the above, we can list all the criminal acts perpetuated by Magic Bank. The first is the mortgage contract was void ab initio, because Magic Bank lied and never intended to lend a single cent of their own asset or depositor's money to the buyer. Number 2, a valid contract must have lawful or valuable consideration. The contract failed for anticipated breach. Magic Bank never planned to give the borrower any valuable consideration. Magic Bank breached all its fiduciary duties to the buyer and is therefore guilty of criminal breach of trust by failing in its good faith requirement. Magic Bank concealed the fact from the buyer that it would be using the buyer's promissory note first to clear all the liens and encumbrances in order to convey clear title to the buyer, and then use the second promissory note to obtain more money from the Federal Reserve Bank or other institutions that buy and sell mortgage-backed security. Magic Bank received up to 3 times the amount of money required to purchase the property and kept the proceeds to protect itself without telling the buyer. Magic Bank violated its corporate charter by lending credit or nothing at all to the buyer and then charging interest on this make-believe loan. Banks are only licensed to lend their own money, not other people's money. Magic Bank used the buyer's promissory note to lend the title, which essentially purchased the property from the seller. The transaction is an ultra-virus transaction because Magic Bank has engaged in a contract outside of its lawful mandate, and its ultra-virus contract is void or voidable because it is not existent in law. Everyone involved in this undertaking with Magic Bank, starting with the loan or mortgage officer, the lawyers, the land title office, and even the central banks, are equally guilty by association by aiding and abetting Magic Bank in its commission of its crime against the buyer and the people who would eventually have to absorb all the loss through increased taxes, etc. In the final analysis, Magic Bank and the others who profited from the ultra-virus transaction are guilty of unjust enrichment and fraud for deceiving the buyer and the people and for acting in concert in this joint endeavor to deceive the buyer. Okay, guys, so we ended today on page 23. No, that wasn't 23. We ended on page 25. So next time I come back, I'm going to pick up on dealing with the police. We'll go over that information. So today's book was Meet Your Straw Man and Whatever You Know. We got a lot more to go over, you guys. This is a lot of information to take in. So definitely listen to this over and over again. I hope you appreciate, me taking my time to do this with you guys. I'm very, very, I'm so much of an advocate into helping our people get an understanding and overstanding of who we are, how powerful we are, and what has been hidden from us. So we're going to unravel these things together. Be sure to check out freedomwriters.org. Click the link above and listen to one of our last book club readings, which we did on this past Sunday morning. We had coffee, tea, and book reading. So be sure to check that out on freedomwriters.org and check out some of the other amazing things that we're doing in our community, you guys. You definitely want to get with us and build with us and grow with us. So we're definitely doing some awesome things. So with that being said, it is your girl, Shay Marie. It's very late. I'm super tired. I thank you all for listening to me today. Take care. Thank you, honey. I want to pick up from on page 25 where we left off at. And we're going to discuss dealing with the police. Years ago, a policeman was your friend and a defender. Things have changed now that the police forces have become commercial organizations dedicated to producing a profit by taking money from you in the form of speeding fines, parking fines, and any number of other sources. It was stated on a national TV recently that in the last 13 years, 300 additional offenses have been invented. as each individual police force is a commercial company in a way that, like a McDonald's restaurant in strategy, it has no authority to enforce anything any more than a McDonald's has. The men and women who work under the banner of their local police force have two separate roles. When they take up their occupation, they take on an oath, pleading to uphold the law. The oath and nothing else gives them the authority to act to enforce common law. That is, the few things which are listed near the start of the legalese section above. It does not authorize them to do anything connected with so-called government statutes, so they have been trained to use legalese to entrap uninformed members of the public. To be fair, it is highly likely that members of the police force are not aware of what they are doing and do not understand the difference between legal statutes, which are optional, and the lawful common law requirement, which apply to everyone and are not optional. Please don't get me wrong. Most policemen and policewomen do a great job and assist members of the public, often above and beyond the requirement of their job, opposing bullying, intimidation, fraud, etc., and comforting in cases of bereavement or injury. Admittedly, the commercial companies who control the police forces are working hard to end this sort of positive behavior using ridiculous health and safety regulations as an excuse, and even to the extent that police officers are instructed to stand by and watch somebody drown and not attempt to save them. This is not the choice of the officer, but the instructions of the owners of the company, because these thousands of invented offenses do not apply to anybody unless they agree to be bound by them. It becomes essential for a police officer to possibly inadvertently persuade member of the public to agree to subject themselves to these unnecessary restrictions and agree to pay invented cash penalties, cash penalties to the local commercial company called the police force. The normal first attempt to establish this spurious dominance of the police officer is by him asking for your name. This is not an innocent question, and it is essential that you are careful in what you say, as there are legalese booby traps all over the place. One suitably reply is, the law does not require me to provide this information, which is entirely correct and avoids pitfall number one. And no matter how often the question is asked, the answer is always the same. It is important not to argue with a police officer, as that is another legalese booby trap, which makes you subject to thousands of hateful regulations designed to part you from your money. So only answer questions, ideally with a non-aggressive question, and don't volunteer any information. If the officer says, you are exceeding the speed limit, you could say, was I? As you don't argue, nor do you say the common law does not require anyone to keep the speed limits, obey road signs, park only where directed, etc. Even though that is perfectly true, maxim arguments are fools. As mentioned before, if the police officer asks, do you understand, your response should be, no, I do not stand under you in this matter. As before, the question is a legalese trap and has nothing whatsoever to do with understanding anything which has been said. Under common law, an offense has only been committed if there is a victim, somebody who has been injured or killed, had possession damaged or stolen, or who has been defrauded. So if the police officer keeps pushing you to agree to pay his company the money when you don't need to, then a good question is to ask, what is the charge, or am I free to go? If you stick to these things, then the police officer has nothing to work on, as you have not agreed to be bound by statutes. You have not provided a name and address for him to write on an invoice or fixed penalty notice, as they like him to write, as they like to call it, and you have not entered into a controversy by arguing with him, or into dishonor by refusing him point blank. One moment, everyone. My apologies. Okay. Sorry about that. There is one other thing, and that is, without being aggressive or offensive in any way, you must not do anything which he tells you to do, because if you do, then those charming legalese people can see that you agree to stand under him and become subject to his legal but not lawful authority, and so become liable to those thousands of conning plans called statutes, carefully crafted in order to rob you in a perfectly legal but not lawful way. One thing which any police officer needs to become aware of is the fact that they do not have any security provided by the police force which employs them. In any situation which does not involve common law, the police officer is on his own, acting as an individual contractor, and as such is wide open to action against him, either under common law if he is acting unlawfully, or by civil court action of his actions warranted, or if his actions warranted. If there is failure to establish joinder, which is where a human voluntarily agrees to represent the straw man and so becomes subject to statutes, then the presumed authority of a police officer does not exist in any respect, and he is acting solely as an individual whose only authority is to enforce common law and nothing else. So this kind of makes sense as to why, like, it's in here in Detroit, when you get a traffic ticket, if you decide to go to court on the traffic ticket, or if you get a court date and you show up, if the police officer doesn't show up, then they throw the ticket out of the court, you guys. They just throw it out and close the case and send you home. So at that point, it's just a waste of your time, having to go downtown and pay all these parking fees and go through all of this extra security checks and stuff. So it's not required. Department of Motor Vehicles, what very few people are aware of is the fact that the act of applying for registration confirms the transfer of physical ownership of the vehicle from you to the purchaser who paid the money to the state. That is, you have given the vehicle away to a commercial company who has done nothing at all for you, and which does not have your best interest at heart. Since it is unlawful to swindle anyone, I would be most interested to hear any reason why this registration should not be deemed to be unlawful, blatant, and an obvious fraud, for there has not been full disclosure of silent and adhesive contract terms. The change of ownership is shown by the fact that you, the previous owner, are not sent a document stating that your straw man is now the registered owner of the vehicle which you have just bought. You are left to pay for maintaining the vehicle which you do not own, and which the actual owner will seize and sell the vehicle, which cost him nothing, if you, as the agent for the registered owner, do not keep on paying for the use of the vehicle. Seizing the vehicle would not be lawful if the vehicle did not belong to the company doing the seizing. The vehicle will be seized in the registration if the registration tax is not paid. The tax was originally introduced as a fund contributed to by the vehicle's driver in order to build new roads and maintain roads that exist. That was a reasonable idea, which means that all the roads in the country belong to the people who paid the money for them to be built and repaired. Local authorities say that they can maintain roads properly. Local authorities say that they can't maintain roads properly as they do not have sufficient funds to do the work. The charge is for more vehicles of larger size on the excuse that they burn more fuel and so contribute more to global warming. The real purpose for the increase is to take more money from people who have no idea what is going on. There is even a proposal now that motorists be charged for every mile that they drive along the roads which they paid for and own. That of course is not the only stream of income from vehicles. A major source of income is the massive tax on fuel for vehicles, and it has been stated that an incredible 65% of the selling price is the proportion which is needed for the location, extraction, processing, and delivery of actual fuel. In passing, it can be noted that vehicles can be run on water, compressed air, energy direct from environment, permanent magnets, and even on gravity. It will, without doubt, be a shock to you that many of the inventors who have done this suddenly disappeared as soon as they started testing their prototypes. Far-fetched? I know of 5 people who have been told to cease and desist or else. When you understand the billions and billions in profit that are made through selling oil products, actions like that become very understandable, especially since the people who do these things own the police forces and the courts and know that there will be no comeback no matter what they do. So what about the driver's license? Under common law, humans have the right to travel freely, and that includes using a vehicle when traveling. The legalese people want to persuade you that you are no longer a traveler under common law, but instead you are a driver, subject to their statutes, and they demand that a driver must have a driver's license, registration, tax, car insurance, and anything else that they can think up. If you wish to live in freedom and somebody asks you to see your license, then the question is, why would I want one of those? A driver's license is only needed for the driver of a vehicle which is being used in commerce. It can be argued that transporting a straw man is a commercial undertaking, so it would be advisable to not have anything related to a straw man with you on the road. It is also important not to give your name, address, or supposed date of birth, or to show any form of ID as that places you in a position of voluntary submission. Obeying the command of another human being who is of equal standing to you, associating yourself with and consequently representing a straw man who is automatically subject to all statutes, being itself a legal fiction joined to that fictional world. So if you are not carrying a passenger who is paying for the journey, and you are not stopping off on a journey to sell things, and you are not transporting a straw man, then you are not a driver with a passenger, but are instead a traveler with a guest traveler travelers do not need a driver's license. Postal demands. Each person generally gets a number of demands for amounts to be paid. Bills. If you get a demand for payment, you will notice that it is not addressed to you, the human, but the fictional straw man, which has a name which sounds like your name but is not the same. The name will be printed on the demand in all capital letters, or in rare cases, preceded by Mr., Mrs., or Miss, and any one of those names refers to the straw man who sounds like you and which has a creation date which matches what you have been told was your birthday. You can pay this demand if you want to, but it is entirely optional. Remember that it is not you who is being billed. Also worth remembering is that you, the human, are bound by common law and not legal statutes, and common law does not require you to pay any form of tax. The company invoicing the straw man is hoping that you do not catch on to the fact that it is not you who is being billed, and so make the payment as a mistake on your part. If you don't want to pay this unnecessary charge on behalf of the straw man, then you can mark the envelope "No Contract," return to sender, mail it back to the sender. Any subsequent letters can be treated in exactly the same way. As in all cases, do not have any telephone conversation about it, as verbal communications bristle the legalese verbal traps. At most, say that you wish to deal with any such matters by mail and terminate the call. It does not matter if an employee turns up at your home and hands you a letter or puts it through your mailbox. The letter is not for you and even addressed to you. It is addressed to the straw man, so it can be mailed back to the same as any other letter. Recently, Tony Rook in the UK took a different approach. He refused to pay for a TV license and went to court over it. There he stated that he would not pay the TV license fee because the BBC, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation, intentionally misrepresented facts about the 9/11 attacks. As is widely known, the BBC reported the collapse of the World Trade Center Building 7, the 47-story Salomon Brothers building, which was never hit by an airplane but which collapsed at free fall speed later that day, more than 20 minutes before the collapse occurred. Rook stated that the BBC had to have had prior knowledge of that terror attack and so were complicit in the attack. He then showed a recording of the BBC video news broadcast along with considerable additional evidence. The judge agreed that Rook had a reasonable case to protest and was found not guilty by the court and was not fined or failure to pay the licensing fee. If it is still available, the BBC News report of the collapse showing the building standing behind the reporter is at, so here's the link to that, you guys, if you want to check that out. If you wish, you can take a more forceful direct stance as demonstrated here by a letter issued by Christopher Lees when dealing with a fixed penalty notice charge. Dear Sirs, please read following notice thoroughly and carefully before responding. It is a notice. It informs you. It means what it says. The reason why you need to read it carefully is simple. I am offering conditional agreement. This removes controversy and means that you no longer have any ultimate recourse to a court of law in this matter, because there is no controversy upon which it could adjudicate. You always have the option of dragging these conditions into a court of law only to be told that they are indeed lawful. That is, of course, always your prerogative should you decide to waste your time. For this reason, it is important that you consider and respond to the offer in substance. The nearest official form will not suffice, and consequently is likely to be ignored by myself without any dishonor on my part. On the other hand, there is a time limit on the agreement being forced. It is reasonable and it runs out then, and If it runs out, then you and the associated parties in default are in default, removing any and all lawful excuse on your part for proceeding in this manner. For these reasons, it is recommended that you carefully consider this notice and response in substance, which means actually addressing the points raised herein. You have apparently made allegations of criminal content against me. You have apparently made demands upon me. I do not understand those apparent demands and therefore cannot lawfully fulfill them. I seek clarification of your documents so that I may act accordingly to the law and maintain my entire body of inalienable natural rights. Failure to accept this offer to clarify and to do so completely and in good faith within 7 days will be deemed by all parties to mean that you and your principal or other parties abandon all demands upon me. I conditionally accept your offer to agree that I am a legal fiction person, Mr. Christopher Mark Lees, and that I owe £70 for services rendered by your company upon proof of claim of all the following: upon proof of claim that I am a person and not a human being, upon proof of claim that you do not know what a person actually is in legal terms, upon proof of claim that you know the difference between a human being and a person legally speaking, upon proof of claim that you know the difference between the terms legal and lawful, upon proof of claim that I am legal fiction person, Mr. Christopher Mark Lees, being the entity to which your paperwork was addressed and not Christopher of the Lees family and as commonly called. Upon proof of claim that the charge was the result of a lawful investigation unmarried by prejudice. Upon proof of claim that I am a member of the society whose statutes and subsisting regulations you are enforcing. Upon proof of claim that I showed you some sort of identification. Upon proof of claim that there is a nameable society that I belong to, that the laws covered within the alleged transgressions state they apply to me within that named society. Sincerely and without ill will, vexation, or frivolity, with your signature, agent, Christopher of the Lees family, is how you would sign it, without prejudice, i.e. all natural inalienable rights reserved. Please address all future correspondence and matter to a human self, namely Christopher of the Lees family, as commonly called, included original paperwork as received. So these are remedies, you guys. I hope you guys are paying attention. This will help you get yourself free. All men are born equal, and so nobody has the right. Okay, so consent. We're on the chapter of consent, okay? It says all men are born equal, and nobody has the right to command you, make demands of you, or force you to do anything. The most that anyone can do is make you an offer to perform. Even though they may say that it is an order or a demand or a summons, it is in reality an offer which you are free to accept. You are free to accept or not as you choose. This is why they keep using applications, registrations, and submissions, as those things give them power over you through their unwitting consent. They are hoping that you will break the law by the way that you deal with their offer. If you just ignore the offer, you are stepping into what is called dishonor. The only effective way of dealing with the offer is conditional acceptance, as already mentioned. If you accept their offer without imposing any conditions, then you are accepting that they have the power to order you around, and that places you under their authority, because you have just chosen to accept their offer, even though you may not understand that you are accepting their offer for them to have authority over you. They also want to get you arguing with them, since that also places you in dishonor. And if there is a court case involved. The judge just looks to see who is in dishonor. Remember, in civil cases, the court is a commercial operation where the judge doesn't care who is right or wrong, just who will pay the court. So we accept all offers, but with our conditions attached to each offer, and that prevents them taking us to court. Remember, courts only deal with disputes, and if you conditionally accept each offer, there won't be any dispute, and so there can't be any court involvement. Some offers are notices, and a notice has to be clear, unequivocal, and concise. You can discharge a notice by seeking clarification that you don't understand the word. They were hoping that you would just ignore the notice and so go into dishonor and become liable. A parking ticket is a notice, and please be aware that a parking ticket is not a bill, but instead is a notice telling you that there is something to which you should pay attention. So write back saying that you have noticed their notice, and as they appear to think that you owe them money, you are happy to pay, but first you need some verification before a payment is made. First, there is a need to verify the debt, so please send me a bill with a human signature on it. Also, I need to see the lawful two-party contract supporting that bill. As they can't supply either of those things, it kills the claim stone dead. So just keep insisting that they either supply those things or else stop bothering you. An interesting alternative is that if they send you a final notice marked remittance, then that piece of paper actually has the value of the money amount written on it. The really silly thing is that you have the option to write accepted for value on that piece of paper, sign it with your name and date it, and mail it back to them. And technically, it concludes the matter by paying the amount demanded. Who was it that said it is a mad world? Actually, the payments come out of the vast amount of money which your straw man has accumulated over the years, and your signing the documents accepted for value authorizes them to take the payment from your straw man account, and that suits them as well as yourself. Writing accepted for value means that you are authorizing them to take the amount they specify out of the straw man, which has such a large amount in it that the balance will hardly be affected at all. Okay. So I've been reading for about 30 minutes. I'm going to drink some water, you guys. Okay? Let's see. I'm going to check my comments, which I don't have any, I see. Okay, so I see I just got one new viewer. If you're watching, welcome. So right now we're reading Meet Your Straw Man and Whatever You Want to Know. I started reading this last night. So I read all the way up to page 25 or 24. Is where we had stopped at. And so I picked up on dealing with the police, and we've been talking about dealing with the police and registrations for your cars and stuff like that, seizings of your vehicle, postal demands. So a lot of this stuff is actual remedies that will help you to deal with these things. So I highly recommend you reviewing this over after it is finished being recorded. If you're watching this, I'm going to post this on my YouTube channel as well. So if you're watching this, I would definitely love your feedback, likes, and, you know, be sure to subscribe to the channel, okay? Let's see here. Okay, so actually payment comes, we read all of that. So let's start at society. We come now to the very difficult subject of American society. I certainly do not know all the answers in this area. And a society is a group of people who willingly join together and abide by a set of rules decided on by members of that society. Loosely speaking, the system which has been set up by the commercial companies who have control of the United States is a society. It is a society which has good features and bad features as well. I'm sure I can skip a page. Okay. Common sense says that there is an advantage for any large number of people or organization, or there is an advantage for any large number of people to organize themselves together and have skilled specialists provide paid services for the other members of that society. For example, having a communal collection of to enable roads, water supplies, sewerage, and the like certainly makes sense. A national health service also looks like a good idea, as does having social welfare benefits for those who are unfortunate, even to become ill or who are unable to find work. However, such things have been subverted by those in charge and maneuvered into a state where these things serve their ends rather than the needs of the general population. While a country-wide medical service sounds like a good thing, it has been reported that the price of some of the medicines supplied to the National Health Service now cost literally 10 times what they did 2 years ago. This looks very much as if the people in control of that service are using it to make massive profits on pharmaceuticals and probably many other services such as parking fees, where millions per year are made from people who have no option but to park in hospital grounds. So what looks like a sensible arrangement appears to have been converted to something different. Perhaps this is an unduly cynical view, but it is certainly in line with many of the other scams which are being run. Income tax was introduced as a temporary measure in connection with a war and who organizes wars. It has never been removed, and yet the country did not seem to have any major problems when there was no income tax. The employees of the commercial company which runs the country, those who take the title of member of Congress or some similar meaningless title, spend a lot of time thinking up new legislation, which if it can be introduced without too many people noticing, it will become a statute. I suggest that the main intention of all legislation is to provide a smokescreen to hide additional charges which members of the public are required to pay. An argument can be that you elected those politicians, so you must abide by whatever they dictate. This carefully avoids mentioning the fact that those politicians have nothing to do with the public. other than giving the appearance that the public has some say in what happens, while the reality is that everything that happens is dictated by the non-elected owners of the companies in charge. The payment of benefits to those in need looks like a very good and necessary thing, but the people in charge see it is an admission that the adult is not capable of taking care of himself, and so they literally think of these ordinary people as cattle. Their words, not mine. What they ignore is the fact that there are many direct and indirect taxes and charges, along with the low level of pay which they reckon that people can be made to work for, are things which have many ordinary hardworking people in the very poor financial position which they despise. They are willing to cheat, steal, and lie, while the ordinary person is not comfortable doing those things. So what should be a good and helpful system has been changed into an oppressive thing which is used to force people into dependency. While a certain level of public contribution for what are thought of as being essential services is understandable and a desirable thing, that the system has been twisted into a mechanism that enslaves and defrauds ordinary people. It has long since reached a ridiculous level with the average person being expected to pay income tax, council tax, inheritance tax, national insurance, capital gains tax, sales tax on house purchases, value-added tax, parking charges, airport charges, fuel taxes, road tax, import duty, tax on alcohol, tax on tobacco, payments for driving, for a driving license, passport. The list goes on and on with additional items. Items are added all the time. People who have been caught for many years in this system will have already paid in so much that they will not want to leave the system and lose the benefits for which they have been paying so long. Others may well consider starting to refuse to pay some of the things demanded of the straw man. This is a personal choice, and one which should be thought about carefully before any action is taken. Please note, this document does not provide you any legal advice, but instead presents fact for information purposes only. If you want legal advice, then consult a lawyer. The armed services. The commercial company which let's go over here. The commercial company which has chosen the name the United States Incorporation has a large number of people employed in what is called the United States Armed Services. Most countries have a similar arrangement. If you were asked what is the purpose of these armed and trained people, how would you reply? It may surprise you to know that the people who employ them hire them to protect themselves, the employers, from their enemies. Not too startling an idea, you say. Yes, as you say, not too startling a revelation, but what may surprise you to discover is that the enemy is quite openly stated to be you. So not only do they describe you as a monster, but also as their enemy. Because they are so heavily outnumbered, they are actually frightened of you and feel that they need armed bodyguards and heavy locked doors to keep them safe from the anger of ordinary people. If they ever find out how they are being manipulated and robbed. In passing, they consider anybody who asks permission to do something with which they are already entitled to do under common law to be a child of the state, and so of no consequence. Let's check out a possible scenario. You take some young people to a McDonald's restaurant and order several meals. When the food has been prepared, the manager says, "I will make a deal with you. You can have your meals for free if you take this loaded revolver and go over to the corner table and shoot this man dead. There will be no comeback, as I am authorizing you to do it." Having blinked a few times, you asked why you should shoot him dead when he has never done anything to you. The manager then says, "He has never done anything to me neither, but he has a lot of money in his wallet and I want to steal it." Grand Rising, honey. So just go and shoot him dead. It's okay because I am telling you to do it for me. Sound a bit mad. Well, it should do so as the murder is, let me start over. Well, it should do so as murder is a criminal offense under common law, and somebody telling you to do it and that is okay because they say so is quite ridiculous. Nobody has the authority to tell you to murder somebody. Remember, all of us were born with exactly the same privileges and rights, and nobody has authority nobody has authority over anyone else, and most definitely not to be able to authorize murder. The owner of the commercial company, which amusingly we think of as the government, stand in the same position as the manager of the McDonald's and have the same lack of authority to breach common law by sending their armed employees into another country to kill the people there, people who have done them no harm, whom they want to rob. All recessions of war are deliberately instigated by the people who gain financially from them. Did you ever wonder why vast sums of public money are spent every year on arms? Who owns the companies that make the profits from selling these arms? Who gets the profits from rebuilding the places damaged or destroyed by your very own army? Who makes a profit from lending vast sums of imaginary money to a country which has been devastated by their unprovoked actions, creating an imaginary debt which can never be repaid? Since World War II, more than 4 million people have died as a result of commercial companies interfering in other countries, and every one of those deaths was a criminal offense under common law. These companies believe that they and their employees are above the law, and so they do whatever they want. From time to time, these companies demand that people be conscripted into their armed forces without their consent. Do you ever remember being asked if you would consent to such press gang operations? If you were asked, did you say yes? And if you did, does it make it lawful to force the people who said no? Do you ever get the impression that things are done which breach both your personal rights and the demands of the common law? Not only does invading other countries and murdering the people there destroy them, but it also has a major negative impact on the people who join the armed forces. Not being aware of their commercial employers are the real terrorists of this world. Do you feel that this is a title far-fetched? Well, it was reported on national TV news on September 6, 2010, that ex-Army Chief General Richard Dannett claimed that vested interests, rather national security, deceived military spending on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. All major wars are carried out for commercial reasons, although that fact will never be admitted publicly. Michael Rivero has put together a concise statement on the situation in America, which impacts upon the world. His statement is at a web location that you can find here at this site, you guys. So make sure you type that into your address bar. You have to write it down and then type it in or something. Here he says, I know that many people have a great deal of difficulty with understanding how many wars are started for no other purpose than to force private central banks onto nations. So let me share a few examples in order that you can understand why the U.S. government is engaged in so many wars against so many foreign nations. There is ample precedent for this. The United States fought the war of the American Revolution primarily over the Currency Act of King George III, which forced the colonists to conduct their businesses only with printed banknotes borrowed by the Bank of England at interest. After the Revolution, the new United States adopted a radically different economic system in which the government issued its own value-based money, so the private banks, like the Bank of England, were not siphoning off the wealth of the people through interest-bearing banknotes. The refusal of King George III to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of money manipulators was probably the prime cause of the revolution. Benjamin Franklin, founding father. But bankers are nothing if not dedicated to their schemes to acquire your wealth, and they know how easy it is to corrupt the leaders of a nation. Just 1 year after Mayor Amschel Rothschild had uttered his infamous statement, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws," the bankers succeeded in setting up a new private central bank called the First Bank of the United States, largely through the efforts of the Rothschilds' chief U.S. supporter, Alexander Hamilton. Founded in 1791, by the end of its 20-year charter, the First Bank of the United States had almost ruined the nation's economy by enriching the bankers. Congress refused to renew the charter, I'm sorry, I'm tongue-tied, guys. Let me drink some water. Whew. Signaling. There we go. I got it out. And I can't even find my space where I was at. Where was I at, y'all? Signaling their intention to go back to a stated issue value-based currency on which the people paid no interest at all to any bankers. This resulted in a threat from Nathan Mayer Rothschild against the U.S. government. Either the application for the renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war. Congress still refused to renew the charter for the First Bank of the United States, whereupon Nathan Mayer Rothschild railed, "Teach those impudent Americans a lesson. Bring them back a colonial status." Financed by the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England, Britain then launched the War of 1812 to recolonize the United States and force it back into slavery to the Bank of England, or to plunge it into so much debt that the people would be forced to accept a new private central bank. The plan worked, even though the War of 1812 appeared to be won by the United States. Congress was forced to grant a new charter for yet another private bank, issuing the public currency as long as Congress was forced to grant a new charter for yet another private bank, issuing the public currency as loans at interest, and that was the Second Bank of the United States. Once again, private bankers were in control of the nation's money supply and cared not who made the laws or how many British and American soldiers had to die for it. Once again, the nation was plunged into debt, unemployment, and poverty through the plundering of the private central bank, and in 1832, Andrew Jackson successfully campaigned for his second term as president under the slogan, "Jackson and No Bank." True to his word, Jackson succeeded in blocking the renewal of the charter for the Second Bank of the United States. Gentlemen, I too have been a close observer of the doings of the Bank of the United States. I have had men watching you for a long time and am convinced that you have used the funds of the bank to speculate in the breadstuffs of the country. When you won, you divided the profits among yourselves, and when you lost, you charged it to the bank. You tell me that if I take the deposits from the bank and the annul its charters, I shall ruin 10,000 families. That may be true, gentlemen, but this is your sin. If I let you go on, you will ruin 50,000 families, and that would be my sin. You are a den of vipers and thieves. I have determined to root you out. And by the eternal God, bringing his fist down on the table, I will root you out. Andrew Jackson, shortly before ending the charter of the Second Bank of the United States from the original minutes of the Philadelphia Committee of Citizens sent to meet with President Jackson, February 1834, according to Andrew Jackson and the Bank of the United States, 1928, by Stan V. Hinkle. Shortly after President Jackson, the only American president to actually pay off the national debt, ended the Second Bank of the United States, there was an attempted assassination which failed when both pistols used by assassin Richard Lawrence failed to fire. Lawrence later said, with Jackson dead, money would be more plentiful. Of course, the present-day American public school system is subservient to the bankers, which wishes to keep certain items of history from you, just as the corporate media is subservient to Monsanto's wishes to keep the dangers of genetically modified foodstuffs from you, and the global warming cult's wishes to conceal from you the fact that the earth has actually been cooling for the last 16 years. Thus, it should come as little surprise that much of the real reason for the events of the Civil War are not well known to the average American. When the Confederacy constitutionally seceded from the United States, the bankers once again saw the opportunity for a rich harvest of debt and offered to fund Lincoln's efforts to bring the South back to the Union by force, but at 30% interest. Lincoln remarked that he would not free the black man from enslaving the white man by the bankers, so using his authority as president, he issued a new government currency, the greenback. This was a direct threat to the wealth and power of the central bankers in the United States, who responded quickly. If this mischievous financial policy, which has its origins in North America, becomes entrenched, then that government will issue its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and will be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous to a degree which is without precedent in the history of the world. The brains and wealth of all countries will migrate to North America. That country must be destroyed, or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe. The London Times, responding to Lincoln's decision to issue government greenbacks to finance the Civil War rather than agree to private bankers' loans at 30% interest. In 1872, New York bankers sent a letter to every bank in the United States arguing them to fund any newspapers which opposed government-issued money, Lincoln's greenback. Dear sir, it is advisable to do all in your power to sustain such permanent daily and weekly newspapers as will oppose the issuing of greenback paper money, and that you also withhold patronage or favors from all applicants who are not willing to oppose the government issue of money. Let the government issue the coin and the banks issue the paper money of the country. To restore the circulation, the government issue of money will be to provide the people with money and will therefore seriously affect their individual profit as bankers and lenders. Triumphant Plutocracy, The Story of American Political Life from 1870 to 1920 by Lynn Wheeler. I'm going to have to pick up that book, guys. Okay, it says, it will not do to allow the greenbacks, as it is called, to circulate as money any length of time, as we cannot control that. I bid. Slavery is likely to be abolished by the war power and chattel slavery or chattel slavery destroyed. This I and my European friends are in favor of, for slavery is but the owning of labor and carries with it the care of the laborer. While the European plan led on by England is for capital to control labor by controlling the wages, this can be done by controlling the money. I bid. Goaded by the private bankers, much of Europe supported the Confederacy against the Union, with the expectation that victory over Lincoln would mean the end of the greenback. France and Britain considered an outright attack on the United States to aid the Confederacy, but were held at bay by Russia, which had just ended the serfdom system and had a state central bank similar to the system of the United States had been founded on. Left free of European intervention, the Union won the war. Lincoln announced his intention to go on issuing greenbacks. Following Lincoln's assassination, the greenbacks were pulled from circulation, and the American people were forced to go back to an economy based on banknotes borrowed at interest from the private bankers. Finally, in 1913, the private central bankers of Europe, in particular the Rothschilds of Great Britain and the Warburgs of Germany, met with their American financial collaborators in Jekyll Island, Georgia, to form a new banking cartel with the express purpose of forming the third bank of the United States, with the aim of placing complete control of the United States money supply once again under the control of the banksters. Owing to hostility over the previous banks, the name was changed to the Federal Reserve Bank system in order to grant the new bank a quasi-governmental image, but in fact it is a privately owned bank, no more federal than the Federal Express. Indeed, in 1912, the Federal Reserve successfully rebuffed a Freedom of Information lawsuit by Bloomberg News on the grounds that, as a private banking corporation and not actually a part of the government, the Freedom of Information Act did not apply to the operations of the Federal Reserve. The year 1913 proves to be a transformative year for the nation's economy. First, with the passage of the 16th Income Tax Amendment and the false claim that it had been ratified. I think that if you were to go back and try to find and review the ratification of the 16th Amendment, which was the Internal Revenue and Income Tax, I think that if you went back and examined that carefully, you will find that a sufficient number of states never ratified the amendment. U.S. District Court Judge James C. Fox Sullivan versus United States, 2003. Later in 1913, apparently unwilling to risk another questionable amendment, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act over the Christmas holiday while members of Congress who were opposed to the measure were at home. This was a very underhanded deal, as the Constitution, which explicitly grants Congress the authority to issue the public currency, does not authorize it to delegate that authority to another party, and so it should have required a new amendment to allow Congress to transfer that authority to a private bank. But Congress passed it, and President Woodrow Wilson signed it, and he thanks, honey. Where did I leave off at? Signed it, and he has promised the bankers that as he had promised the bankers he would, in exchange for generous campaign contributions. Wilson later regretted that decision, stating in 1919, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government of conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." The very next year, World War I started, and it is important to remember that prior to the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war. No profits, no war. The First World War started between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, but quickly shifted to focus to Germany, whose industrial capacity was seen as an economic threat to Great Britain, who saw the deadline of the British pound as a result of too much emphasis on financial activity to the neglect of agricultural, industrial development, and infrastructure, not unlike the present-day United States. Although pre-war Germany had a private central bank, that bank was heavily restricted and inflation kept to reasonable levels. Under government control, investment was guaranteed to internal economic development, and Germany was seen as a major power. So in the media of the day, Germany was portrayed as the prime instigator of World War I, and subsequently not just defeated, but had its industrial base flattened. Following the Treaty of Versailles, June 1919, Germany was ordered to pay the war costs of all the participating nations, even though Germany had not actually started the war. This amounted to 3 times the value of all Germany itself. Germany's private central bank, to which Germany had gone deeply into debt to pay the cost of the war, broke free of government control, and massive inflation followed, mostly triggered by currency speculators, permanently trapping the German people in endless debt. When the Weimar Republic economically collapsed, it opened the door for National Socialists to take power. Their first financial move was to issue their own state currency, which was not borrowed from private central banks. Freed from having to pay interest on the money in circulation, Germany blossomed and quickly began to rebuild its industry. The media called it the German miracle. Time magazine lionized Hitler for the amazing improvement of life for the German people and the explosion of German industry, and even named him Time magazine's Man of the Year in 1938. Once again, Germany's industrial outputs became a threat to Great Britain, resulting in these comments. Should Germany merchandise do business again in the next 50 years, we have led this war, World War I, in vain. Winston Churchill in the Times, 1919. We will force this war upon Hitler if he wants it or not. Winston Churchill, 1936, broadcast. Germany becomes too powerful. We have to crush it. Winston Churchill, November 1936, speaking to U.S. General Robert E. Wood. This war is an English war, and its goal is the destruction of Germany. Winston Churchill, autumn 1939 broadcast. Germany's state-issued value-based currency was also a direct threat to the wealth and power of the private central banks as early as 1933. They started to organize a global boycott against Germany to strangle this upstart rulers who thought he could break free of private central banks. As had been the case in World War I, Great Britain and other nations threatened by Germany's economic power looked for an excuse to go to war, and as a public anger in Germany grew over the boycott, Hitler foolishly gave them that excuse. Years later, in a spirit of candor, the real reasons for that war were made clear. The war wasn't only about abolishing fascism, but to conquer sales markets. We could have, if we had intended to, prevented this war from breaking out without firing one shot, but we didn't want to. Winston Churchill to Truman, Fulton, USA, March 1946. Germany's unforgivable crime before World War II was its attempt to loosen its economy out of the world trade system and to build up an independent exchange system from which world finance couldn't profit anymore. We butchered the wrong pig. Winston Churchill. The Second World War. Bern, 1960. As a side note, we need to step back before World War II and recall Marine Major General Smedley Butler. One moment. In 1933, Wall Street bankers and financiers had bankrolled two successful coups by both Hitler and Mussolini. Brown Brothers Harriman in New York was financing Hitler right up to the day war was declared with Germany, and they decided that a fascist dictatorship in the United States based on the one in Italy would be far better for their business interests than Roosevelt's New Deal, which threatened massive wealth redistribution to recapitalize the working and middle class of America. So the Wall Street tycoons recruited General Butler to lead the overthrow of the U.S. government and install a Secretary of General Affairs who would be answerable to Wall Street and not to the people, and would crush social unrest and shut down all labor unions. General Butler pretended to go along with the scheme, but then exposed the plot to Congress. Congress then as now in the pocket of Wall Street bankers refused to act. When Roosevelt learned of the planned coup, he demanded the arrest of the plotters, but the plotters simply reminded Roosevelt that if any of them were sent to prison, their friends on Wall Street would deliberately collapse the still fragile economy and blame Roosevelt for it. Roosevelt was thus unable to act until the start of World War II, at which time he prosecuted many of the plotters under the Trading with the Enemy Act. The congressional minutes into the coup were finally released in 1976 and became the inspiration for the movie 7 Days in May. So there's a movie we gotta look up, you guys. So movies definitely tells the history. It tells the truth about who we are, people, and about what's actually been going on. One of the movies that you can definitely watch, The Wizard of Oz, was actually a movie that was created after the Great Depression of 1933, you guys. That is when we moved over into we moved out of silver and gold and into the dollar currency, you guys, and basically our gold and stuff was stolen, but the Americans didn't know. So definitely go watch The Wizard of Oz and just try to tap into your intuition and really decode what is really being told to you with The Wizard of Oz, because it tells a lot of story behind the truth about what really happened. And a book that you can read to coincide with that is called The Redemption Manual, Freedom from Servitude. I have a PDF file of that. If you would like access to it, just let me know. It says, I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service as a member of our country's most agile military force, the Marine Corps. I served in commissioned ranks. I served in all commissioned ranks from second lieutenant to major general. During that period, I spent more of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the banksters. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I suspected that I was just a part of the racket at the time. Now I'm sure of it. Like all members of the military profession, I never had an original thought until I left the service. My mental faculties remained in suspended animation while I obeyed the orders of the higher-ups. This is typically with everyone in the military service. Thus, I helped make Mexico, and especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for national city bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1909 through 12. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. In China, in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. During those years, I had, as the boys in the back room would say, a swell racket. I was rewarded with honors, medals, and promotion. Looking back on it, I feel I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 city districts. I operated on 3 continents. General Smedley Butler, former U.S. Marine Corps Commandant, 1935. Let me drink some water, guys. This is really interesting. What are you guys thinking? I see I got 3 viewers. We're really getting down into the truths about what has taken place over the last, 200, 300 years, guys? As President John F. Kennedy understood the predatory nature of private central bank, he understood why Andrew Jackson fought so hard to end the National Bank of the United States. So Kennedy wrote and signed Executive Order 11110, which ordered the U.S. Treasury to issue a new public currency, the United States note. Kennedy's United States notes were not borrowed from the Federal Reserve, but created by the U.S. government and backed by the silver stockpiles held by the U.S. government. It represented a return to the system of economics on which the United States had been founded, and this was perfectly legal for Kennedy to do, as all told, some $4.5 billion went into public circulation, eroding interest payments to the Federal Reserve and loosening their control over the nation. 5 months later, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, and the United States notes pulled from circulation and destroyed, except for samples held by collectors. John J. McCloy, president of Chase Manhattan Bank and president of the World Bank, was named as part of the Warren Commission, presumably to make certain that the banking dimensions behind the assassination were concealed from the public. This is crazy, guys. Keep doing this. Oh, most definitely, Jaquise, I most definitely will. And you can go check out, I started this book last night. So I put the link to the recording from last night in the description above the video. And also make sure you check out freedomwriters.org. We had started our book club reading this past Sunday. And I have the recording to that on there. We went over a book called Correct Your Political Status. So be sure to check that out and pass along this information. Make sure you share it on your page too. As we enter the 12th year of what future history will most certainly describe a World War III, we need to examine the financial dimensions behind the wars. Towards the end of the World War II, when it became obvious that the Allies were going to win and dictate the post-war environment, the major world economic powers met at Bretton Woods, a luxury resort in New Hampshire, in July 1944, and hammered out a Bretton Woods agreement before international finance. The British pound lost its position as the global trade and reserve currency, and its place was taken by the U.S. dollar, part of the price demanded by Roosevelt in exchange for the U.S. entry into war. Without economic advantages of being the world's central currency, Britain was forced to nationalize the Bank of England in 1946. The Bretton Woods Agreement was ratified in 1945, and in addition to making the U.S. dollar the global reserve and trade currency, obliged the signatory nations to tie their currencies to the dollar. The nations which ratified Bretton Woods did so on two conditions. The first was that the Federal Reserve would refrain from overprinting the dollar as a means to loot real products and produce from other nations in exchange for ink and paper, basically an imperial tax. That assurance was backed up by the second, which was the U.S. dollar, which would always be convertible into gold at $35 per ounce. Of course, the Federal Reserve, being a private bank and not answerable to the U.S. government, did start overprinting paper dollars, and much of the perceived prosperity of 1950s and 1960s was the result of foreign nations' obligations to accept the notes as being worth gold as the rate of $35 an ounce. In 1970, France looked at the huge pile of paper notes sitting in their vaults, for which real French products like wine and cheese had been traded, and notified the United States government that they would exercise their option under Bretton Woods to return the paper notes for gold at the $35 per ounce exchange rate. Of course, the United States had nowhere near the gold to redeem the paper notes, so on August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon temporarily suspended the gold convertibility of the U.S. Federal Reserve notes. You guys, this is crazy. This is so crazy. So here on page 50, I started on page 25. Probably gonna split this up into 3 sections, you guys, since there's about 75 pages or more to read. Most of this is just resources here in the back. So we're definitely going to, I'm gonna finish this chapter. I'm gonna finish these few couple of pages. Yep, so actually, yep, I'm going to finish this and then we'll complete the summary tomorrow. Okay? Because that is all that will be left is the summary. Okay? So it says, this Nixon shock effectively ended Bretton Woods, and many global currencies started to disengage from the U.S. dollar. Worse still, since the United States had collateralized their loans with the nation's gold reserve, it quickly became apparent that the U.S. government did not, in fact, have enough money to cover its outstanding debts. Foreign nations began to get nervous about their loans to the U.S. and understandably were reluctant to lend any additional money to the United States without some form of collateral. So Richard Nixon started the environmental movement with the EPA and its various programs such as wilderness zones, roadless areas, heritage rivers, wetlands, all of which took vast areas of public land and made them off limits to the American people who were technically the owners of those lands. But Nixon had little concern for the environment, for the real purpose of this land grab under the guise of the environment was to pledge those Preston lands and their vast mineral resources as collateral on the national debt. The plethora of government programs was simply to conceal the true scale of how much American land was being pledged to foreign lenders as collateral on the government's debt, eventually almost 25% of the nation's itself. This is ridiculous, you guys. My ancestors is getting in me. I'm getting mad all over again. With open land for collateral already in short supply, the U.S. government embarked on a new program to shore up a saging international demand for the dollar. The United States approached the world's oil-producing nations, mostly in the Middle East, and offered them a deal. In exchange for only selling their oil for dollars, the United States would guarantee the military safety of those oil-rich nations. The oil-rich nations would agree to spend and invest their U.S. paper dollars inside the United States, in particular in U.S. Treasury bonds, redeemable through future generations of taxpayers. The concept was labeled the petrodollar. In effect, the U.S., no longer able to back the dollar with gold, was now backing it with oil, other people's oil, and the necessity to control those oil nations in order to prop up the dollar has shaped America's foreign policy in the region ever since. This is absolutely ridiculous. But as America's manufacturing and agricultural has declined, the oil-producing nations faced a dilemma. Those piles of U.S. Federal Reserve notes were not able to purchase much from the United States because the United States had little other than real estate, which anyone wanted to buy. Europe's car and aircraft were superior and less costly, while experiments with GMO food crops led to nations refusing to buy U.S. food exports. Israel's constant belligerence against its neighbors caused them to wonder if the U.S. could actually keep up their end of the petrodollar agreement. I'm sorry, you guys, my nose keeps itching. Okay, it says oil-producing nations started to talk of selling their oil for whatever currency the purchasers choose to use. Iraq, already hostile to the United States following Desert Storm, demanded the right to sell their oil for euros in 2000, and the United Nations agreed to allow it in 2002 under the Oil for Food program instituted following Desert Storm. 1 year later, the United States re-invaded Iraq, lynched Saddam Hussein, and placed Iraq's oil back on the world's market only for US dollars. So this is the reason why 9/11 happened, you guys. They were trying to cover up what was really happening. Following 9/11, the U.S. policy shift away from being an impartial broker of peace in the Middle East to the one of unquestioned support for Israel's damn, my nose keep itching. Golly. I'm so sorry. Israel's aggressions only further eroded confidence in the petrodollar, and even more oil-producing nations started openly taking off oil trade for other global currencies. Over in Libya, Muammar Gaddafi had instituted a state-owned central bank and a value-based trade currency, the gold dinar. Gaddafi announced that Libya's oil was for sale, but only for the gold dinar. Other African nations, seeing the rise of the gold dinar and the euro, even as the US dollar continued its inflation-driven decline, flocked to the new Libyan currency for trade. This move had the potential to seriously undermine the global hegemony of the dollar. French President Nicolas Sarkozy reportedly went so far as to call Libya a threat to the financial security of the world. So the United States invaded Libya, brutally murdered Gaddafi, the object of lessons of Saddam's lynching not being enough on a message. Apparently. I'm sorry, guys. I might have to take a break. I don't know. My nose is starting to act crazy. I'll keep on, though. Imposed a private central and returned Libya's oil outputs to dollars only. The gold that was to have been made into the gold dinars is, as of last report, unaccounted for. According to General Wesley Clark, the master plan for the dollarification of the world's oil nations included 7 targets: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. Venezuela, which dared to sell their oil to China for the yen, is a late 8th edition. What is notable about the original 7 nations originally targeted by the U.S. is that none of them are members of the international settlements. The private central bank, I'm sorry, guys. Let me start the sentence over. It says, what is notable about the original 7 nations originally targeted by the U.S. is that none of them are members of the Bank for International Settlements, the private central banker's private central bank located in Switzerland. This meant that these nations are deciding for themselves how to run their nation's economies, rather than submit to the private international banks. Now the bankers' gun sights are on Iran, which dares to have a government-controlled central bank and sell their oil for whatever currency they choose. The war agenda is always to force Iran's oil to be sold only for dollars and to force them to accept a privately owned central bank. Now, the The German government just recently asked for the return of some of their gold bullion from the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve. France has said it will take 5 years to return Germany's gold. The United States has said they will need 8 years to return Germany's gold. This suggests strongly that the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve have used the deposited gold for other purposes, and they are scrambling to find new gold to cover the shortfall and prevent a gold run. So France suddenly invades Mali, ostensibly to combat Al-Qaeda, with the U.S. joining in. Mali just happens to be one of the world's largest gold producers, with government accounting for 80% of Mali's exports. War for the banksters does not get more obvious than that. Americans have been raised by a public school system and media that constantly assures them that the reasons for all these wars and assassinations are many and varied. The U.S. claims to bring democracy to the conquered lands. They haven't. Okay. America has raised, let me see. They haven't. This usually results, the usual result as a U.S. overthrow is the imposition of dictatorship, such as 1953 CIA overthrow. I do apologize, you guys, of Iran's democratically elected government of Mohammed Mossadegh, and the imposition of the Shah, or the 1973 CIA overthrow of Chile's democratically elected government of President Salvador. Oh God, I got to blow my nose and stuff. I'm gonna pause, you guys, one moment. Can you hand me some tissue, please, right quick? Goodness gracious. I guess reading bullshit makes your allergies flare up. Shit. Okay. My apologies. Let's get this book finished, y'all. How many? Oh, I've been on here an hour and 34 minutes. Wow. Okay, it says, assassinations are always passed off as crazed lone nuts to obscure the real agenda. Couple more pages. Okay, the real agenda is simple. It is enslavement of the people by the law of creation of the false sense of obligation. The obligation is false because the private central banking system, by design, always creates more debt than money, which to repay the debt. Private central banking is not science. It is a religion and a set of arbitrary rules created to benefit the priesthood, meaning the owners of the private central bank. The fraud persists with often lethal results because the people are tricked into believing that this is the way of life is supposed to be and no alternative exists or should be dreamed of. The same was true of two earlier systems of enslavement ruled by divine right and slavery, both of which are systems designed to trick people into obedience, and both of which are recognized by modern civilization as illegitimate. It only works as long as people allow themselves to believe that this is the way of life is supposed to be. But understand, this is above all else. Private central banks do not exist to serve the people, the community, or the nation. Private central banks exist to serve their owners, to make them rich beyond the dreams of Midas and all the cost of paper, ink, and the right bribe to the right officials. Behind all these wars are the assassinations, the hundred million horrible deaths from all wars, lie, and single policy of dictatorship. The private central bankers allow rulers to rule only on the condition that the people of the nation remain enslaved to the private central banks. Failing that, any rule will be killed and their nation invaded by those other nations which are already enslaved to private central banks. The so-called clash of civilization we read about on the corporate media is really a war between banking systems, with the private central bankers forcing themselves on the rest of the world, no matter how many millions must die for it, in constant hate mongering against Muslims, lies, and a simple fact. Like the ancient Christians prior to the Knights Templars private banking system, Muslims forbid usury, the lending of money at interest, and that is the reason why the American government and media insist that Muslims must be converted or killed. They refuse to submit to currencies issued at interest. They refuse to be debt slaves. So off to war American children must go, to spill their blood for the gold of the money junkies. We barely survived the last two world wars. In the nuclear bioweapon age, are the private central bankers willing to risk incinerating the whole planet just to feed their greed? Apparently so. Flag waving and propaganda aside, all modern wars are wars by and for the private bankers, fought and bled for by third parties unaware of their true reason why they are expected to be crippled and killed. The process is quite simple. As the private central bank issues its currency as a loan at interest, the public is forced deeper and deeper into debt. When the people are reluctant to borrow anymore, that is when the Keynesian economists demand the government borrow more to keep the pyramid scheme working. When both the people and the government refuse to borrow deeper into debt to pay the war, then after the war to borrow more to rebuild. When the war is over, the people have about the same as they did before the war, except the graveyards are far larger and everyone is in debt to the private banksters for the next century. This is why Brown Brothers Harriman in New York funded the rise of Adolf Hitler. As long as private central banks are allowed to exist, inevitably, as night follows day, there will be poverty, hopelessness, and millions of dollars or millions of deaths and endless wars until the earth itself is sacrificed to Mammon in flames. The path to true peace on earth lies in the abolishment of all private central banking everywhere and return to the state-issued value-based currency that allowed nations and people to become prosperous. Okay, so that's the end of the reading for this book today, you guys. We're going to complete the summary, which is only a few pages long. So I probably won't come back and do the summary. I highly recommend you guys just get this book, or maybe I'll record it on my own time. Your internet stopped for 3 minutes. Wow. Oh, I'm not sure when that happened, guys, but I do apologize. Give thanks. I don't think the internet stopped. I put the phone down to go blow my nose. Give thanks, sister, and appreciate you for giving your energy to this. Indeed, Mother, much love. Peace and love to you. Thanks for stopping by and watching. Please share, like, and share. And guys, I will be back. We got tons of books, guys. Tons of books to go over. So don't worry. We're going to get through this together. We're going to learn what we need to know. Make sure you guys go check out the recordings. Go check out freedomwriters.org. And we're going to get to it. We're going to get to it. Okay, yeah, before you said BS, so that was, I put the phone down to go blow my nose. You can see the tissue. Like, my nose was itching. So I had put the phone down like this to go blow my nose. So that must be what that was. So I had to go really blow my nose, you guys. So I apologize about that. But other than that, thanks, babe, for your support and your help. If they missed anything, they're just going to have to get the book themselves. It's very cheap, less than $10 to buy on Amazon, guys. Or you can check out the thrift bookstore, where you can get books for dirt cheap on there. But I will check you guys back later on my next video. And we'll see you later.